There is a part of you that walks behind you, always. A silhouette that you cast, a mirror image you cannot see. It is not a monster, though we often fear it as one. It is not a stranger, though we spend a lifetime pretending it is. It is you, the unlived, the refused, the forgotten you. And the journey to meet this hidden self is, perhaps, the most important pilgrimage we will ever undertake. This is the territory of the shadow, a concept brought into the light by the work of Carl Jung, and lived with profound depth by his student, Robert A. Johnson. Johnson's own life was a testament to this delicate balance between light and dark. As a child, he was in a terrible accident, a brush with death that became a doorway. In that nothingness, he did not find emptiness. He found an ecstatic world, a world bathed in gold, a vision of wholeness. When he was pulled back into life, the vision faded, and the world felt pale. He struggled to bear it. He was, for a time, an innocent fool, a particle awkward and lost in the outer world. He knew the slender threads that separate life from death, and it was his exploration of the inner world that became his anchor. His encounter with Jung was decisive. Jung gave him a simple, radical instruction to spend most of his time alone, to have a room for nothing but inner work, to never join any organization. Jung told him that the unconscious would protect him, would give him everything he needed. His one duty was to his inner work. All else would follow. His task was not outward accomplishment, but to contribute to the evolution of the collective soul. Years later, at 54, feeling lost again, Robert traveled to India. Exhausted, his luggage lost, he retreated to his hotel room, wanting only to sleep. He looked out the window, and there it was, the golden world, returned after decades. A second chance, a reminder. If you trust the inner world, it will take care of you. This golden world is not a prize we earn or a place we build. It is a state of consciousness, a perception that is available to anyone, at any time, in any place. It is the kingdom of heaven, not above, but within, and the path to it, strangely, leads not upward into the light, but downward, into the parts of ourselves we have been taught to hide. We live in a time that celebrates the external. We curate our highlights. We perform our pleasantness. But the true water of life, the source of meaning, lies within. The most vital exploration is not of distant lands, but of the hidden geography of our own psyche. To do this, we must move beyond the ego, the part of us we know and present to the world, and delve into the shadow. The shadow is not, as we so often mistake it, evil. It is not a demon to be exorcised. It is simply the part of us we fail to see or know. It is the contents of the unconscious, everything we have pushed down, refused, or forgotten. We think we can disown it, that it is not part of us. But this is an illusion. The shadow is you. To avoid it is to go to war with yourself. We all have this silhouette trailing us. It is the inverse of what we show the world. It represents what we lack, and it has a curious, compensatory role. It seeks to make us whole. Think of it this way: the shadow of a criminal is not more violence, but sincerity, tenderness, connection. The shadow of a shy person is not more timidity, but assertiveness, commitment, responsibility. When we display only the pleasant parts of ourselves, when we deny our authentic emotions to be likable, to avoid conflict, we do not make those feelings disappear. We feed them to the shadow. They collect in the dark corners of our personality, building a resentment that we then, unconsciously, project onto others. We see in them the very qualities we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves. We must recognize this simple, difficult truth. We are capable of both good and evil. That is the only reality. To deny the darkness is to deny half of yourself, The shadow is not our enemy. It is our friend. It contains pure gold, waiting to be integrated. It only becomes hostile when it is ignored. When we are unwilling to take the reins of our own life, the shadow will take control, dragging us through life in a state of neurotic compulsion. You can either be guided by your shadow or dragged by it. It is not goodness alone that makes us holy. It is the union of good and evil that gives way to the transcendent. So where does this shadow come from? Our refused characteristics do not vanish. They gather in the dark. When they have been hidden long enough, they take on a life of their own, a shadow life. If this shadow accumulates more energy than our conscious ego, it can erupt as an overpowering rage, a sudden, inexplicable act that seems to come from nowhere. Someone once asked Jung, "How do you find your shadow?" He replied, "How do you find the dragon that has swallowed you? By its very nature. The shadow is a part of you that you do not know. If you can talk about it, it is already conscious and no longer shadow. This is why other people are often the first to see our shadow and embarrassing, but vital reality. We are born whole, but culture demands that we live out only part of our nature. We are taught to be good, to be kind, to be productive. In the process, we fracture the self. We create an ego, the acceptable self, and a shadow, the forbidden self. This is our legacy from the Garden of Eden. By eating from the tree of knowledge, we gained consciousness of good and evil, and in doing so, we cast ourselves out of wholeness. But here is a curious truth. We often resist the noble aspects of our shadow more strenuously than we hide the dark ones. It is relatively easy to admit you have a lazy streak. It is terrifying to admit you have a profound nobility of character. To own your gold can be more disruptive than to own your flaws. Ignoring the shadow means ignoring this inner gold, and many people only discover it when they are broken open by a severe illness or a life-threatening crisis. In that intense suffering, they realize an important part of them has been lying dormant. This is the archetype of the wounded healer, the shaman who falls ill, only to find the insight needed to heal himself and bring wisdom back to his people. The elixir of life is found in the womb. By the time we reach adulthood, we have a clearly defined ego and shadow, a system of right and wrong, and the religious task, the task of religio, of putting back together, is to restore the wholeness of personality. We modern people are broken within. We do not want to hear that there is something more important than our ego. But something needs to die for this wholeness to be born, not the body, but the ego. Robert Johnson suggests that the first half of life is devoted to the cultural process, gaining skills, raising a family, disciplining ourselves. The second half of life is devoted to restoring the wholeness, the holiness of life. He offers a powerful image for our personality, the seesaw on the right side. We place our acceptable qualities, the righteous side. On the left, we place the unacceptable, the forbidden side. No quality can ever be discarded. It can only be moved from one side to the other. And a fundamental law prevails. The seesaw must be balanced to remain in psychic equilibrium. If you indulge a characteristic on the right side, you must balance it with an equal weight on the left. The reverse is equally true. When this balance is not maintained, we experience mood swings or suddenly act as a completely different person. If the seesaw becomes too heavily loaded, it can break at the center. This is a psychosis, a breakdown. We take for granted the balance of our body temperature. We rarely recognize that the psyche, too, has its own way of seeking balance. A medieval manuscript illustrates this perfectly. It shows the tree of knowledge growing from Adam's navel. On the left, the Virgin Mary, clothed as a nun, picks fruit from the tree and hands it to a line of penitents for their salvation. On the right, Eve, naked, picks fruit from the same tree and hands it to a line of people for their damnation. A single tree, a dual product. Whenever we pluck the fruit of creativity, our other hand plucks the fruit of destruction. We would love to have one without the other, but it is not possible. The prevailing idea of sainthood is to live entirely on the right side, the good side. But this condition is profoundly unstable. The holy place is not on one end or the other. The holy place is the center point. While we must often hide our dark side from society, we should never hide it from ourselves. A.C. Augustine thundered. To act is to sin. To create is to destroy in the same moment. We cannot make light without a corresponding darkness. India understands this. Brahma, the god of creation, is balanced by Shiva, the god of destruction, while Vishnu sits in the middle, holding the opposites together. No one can escape the dark side of life, but we can pay it out intelligently. This is one of Jung's great insights. The ego and the shadow come from the same source and exactly balance each other. To make light is to make shadow. One cannot exist without the other. To own one's own shadow is to reach a holy place and in a sense are not attainable in any other way. It is not perfection we must strive for, but wholeness. This is how the joy of life is created. It is the embrace of our own humanity, our strengths and our flaws, not a one-sided goodness that has no vitality. Robert Johnson shares a story from his own life. He once had difficult guests who stayed days beyond their welcome. He exercised heroic patience and courtesy. When they left, he felt he had earned something nice for his virtue. He went to a nursery to buy a beautiful plant for his garden. But before he knew what was happening, he picked a fight with the nurseryman and made a miserable spectacle of himself. Since he did not consciously acknowledge his own irritation and resentment, his shadow, it landed on this poor stranger. Balance was served, but in a clumsy and stupid way. The shadow will claim its dues. The question is whether we do so intelligently or through unconscious projection. Projection is always easier than assimilation. We see our own darkness in others. This tendency to see our shadow out there, in a specific person or group, is the most dangerous aspect of the modern psyche. It fuels prejudice, conflict, and war. The front page of any newspaper hurls the collective shadow at us. We must be whole, whether we like it or not. The only choice is whether we incorporate the shadow consciously, with dignity, or do it through neurotic behavior. It is only by taking the shadow back into ourselves that we can assimilate it. It must return to where it originated, where it is required for your own wholeness. To be in the presence of another's shadow and not reply, not engage in the battle, is nothing short of genius. In literature, Goethe's Faust is the great story of the meeting of ego and shadow. Faust, a scholar, finds life meaningless. His seesaw is at the breaking point. He meets his shadow, Mephistopheles. Through their difficult relationship, Faust is saved from his lifelessness and becomes capable of passion, and Mephistopheles, the devil, discovers his own capacity to love. Love is the word our Western tradition uses to describe this synthesis of ego and shadow. And yet, we resist this synthesis. We resist our own nobility as much as our darkness. If you find the gold in someone, they will often resist it with all their strength. This is why we indulge in hero worship. It is easier to put our gold onto someone else than to carry it ourselves. All our energy lies in our shadow. Ignoring it makes us feel lifeless, exhausted, lazy. A conscious confrontation with the shadow fills us with energy and stamina. Robert Johnson writes of a time he was exhausted before a lecture. A wise woman told him to go to a private room, dampen a towel so it was heavy, and throw it at the floor as hard as he could and shout, He felt foolish, but when he walked out to the lecture platform, there was fire in his eyes. He had energy, stamina, voice. The shadow had backed him, but not overwhelmed him. Even animals sense this hidden power. Parrots learn profanity more easily than common phrases because we utter our curses with so much vigor. The parrot hears the energy invested in the words. In middle age, we grow tired of the involuntary swings of the seesaw, and to our surprise, we find that the middle ground is not the grey compromise we feared. It is the place of ecstasy and joy. If we learn to take the energy of the shadow and use it correctly, it can set the stage for a whole new phase of life. We can do this through ritual. A shadow ritual involves finding one of those left-hand contents and giving it expression in a way that does not damage our right-hand personality. We can write the shadow material down and burn the paper. We can fast. We can practice a ceremonial sacrifice. A symbolic ritual affects us as much as any real event, as long as it holds meaning for us. All healthy societies have a rich ceremonial life to pay out their shadow in a symbolic way. We must acknowledge the whole of reality, destruction and creation, evil and redemption. Our fondness for the light alone blinds us to the greater reality and keeps us from this larger vision of wholeness. This is the paradox, and paradox is the water of life we so desperately need. All the great myths remind us that the treasure is found in the least likely place. Strangely, the best can come from the most neglected quarter. We will go to almost any length to avoid this painful paradox, but in that refusal, we only confine ourselves to the useless experience of contradiction. Contradiction is barren. It brings the crushing burden of meaninglessness. One can endure any suffering if it has meaning, but meaninglessness is unbearable. Paradox, on the other hand, is creative. It is a powerful embracing of reality. Every human experience can be expressed in terms of paradox. Day is only comprehensible in contrast to night. Masculinity only has meaning in relation to femininity. Activity only has meaning in relation to rest. Where is joy not bounded by sobriety? 2. Advance from opposition, which is always a quarrel, to paradox, which is always holy, is to make a leap of consciousness. That leap carries us through the chaos of middle age and gives us a vista that enlightens the remaining years of life. Winning and losing, eating and fasting, earning and giving, these are not opposites. They are all necessary to the human condition. So what do we do with this apparently insufferable contradiction? This is the question at the base of every neurotic dissociation, every psychological problem. If we approach it wrongly, we become bound in a neurotic paralysis. We can neither act nor be still. The suffering is intense. The Danish philosopher Kierkegaard described this as the life of the aesthete, who chases pleasure, but is struck with despair. He wrote, "I can't be bothered. I can't be bothered to ride. The motion is too violent. I can't be bothered to walk. It's strenuous. I can't be bothered to lie down, for either I'd have to stay lying down, and that I can't be bothered with, or I'd have to get up again, and I can't be bothered with that either. In short, I just can't be bothered." Kierkegaard, 2. Believe the solution was paradox, found in a leap of faith. To think that one way of action is profane and another sacred is a terrible error. It is the seat of most neurotic suffering. Religion, at its best, bridges and heals. It restores and reconciles the oppositions that torture us. It helps us move from contradiction, that painful condition where things oppose each other, to the realm of paradox, where we can entertain, to contradictory notions simultaneously and give them equal dignity. The poet William Blake said, "We should go to heaven for form, and to hell for energy, and marry the two." Most people spend their lives supporting the civil war of opposites within themselves. This only brings despair. In the miracle of the paradox. It is good to win. It is also good to lose. It is good to have. It is also good not to have. Each represents a truth. To stay loyal to paradox is to earn the right to wholeness. Fanaticism is always a sign that one has adopted one of a pair of opposites at the expense of the other. The high energy of fanaticism is a frantic effort to keep one half of the truth at bay while the other half takes control. This yields a brittle personality, one that is always right. But what does paradox have to do with the shadow? Everything. There can be no paradox, that sublime place of reconciliation, until one has owned one's own shadow and drawn it up to a place of dignity and worth. To own your shadow is to prepare the ground for spiritual experience, conflict to paradox, to revelation. That is the divine progression. Who does not spend their time debating whether to do the disciplined task or to drift in dreamy nowhere. Neither is holy. The holy place is exactly in the paradox between them. To be in a situation with no way out, a conflict with no solution, is the classical beginning of individuation, of self-realization. In this state, the unconscious wants the hopeless conflict, to put ego consciousness up against the wall, so that we have to realize that whatever we do is wrong. This is an act of humility. It invites us to see beyond the ego, to that which is greater than ourselves. We know the mandala, the holy circle that represents wholeness, a symbol of our unity with the divine. But there is another, lesser known symbol, the mandala. The mandala is an almond-shaped segment made when two circles partly overlap. It is the overlap of the opposites. It instructs us in reconciliation. We often see Christ or the Virgin Mary at its center. Christ himself is the intersection of the divine and the human, the prototype for the reconciliation of opposites. When we are tired, when we can no longer bear the painful contradictions of life, the mandala shows the way. Our healing proceeds from that overlap of what we call good and evil, light and dark. It is not the light alone that heals. The place where light and dark begin to touch is the most profound religious experience we can have. We like to think stories are about the triumph of good over evil. But the deeper truth is that good and evil are superseded. The two become one. When one is truly a citizen of both heaven and earth, one realizes there was only one circle all along. The two circles were an optical illusion of our need to see things as separate. If one makes a mandala in the privacy of one's interior life, it is heard for more than 1,000 miles. People often ask Jung, "Will we make it?" referring to the cataclysm of our time. He always replied, "If enough people will do their inner work, by acknowledging our shadow, we diminish the shadow we project onto the world. We contribute less to the collective darkness that fuels war and division, but we also prepare the way for the mandala, that ultimate place of wholeness in the inner life. The great prize of human consciousness. In the Four Quartets, T.S. Eliot writes, "The fire and the rose are one. By overlapping the two elements of fire and flower, he makes a mandala." We are pleased to the depth of our soul to be told that the fire of transformation and the flower of rebirth are one and the same. Your shadow is not your enemy. It is the keeper of your gold, the source of your energy, the missing piece of your soul. Do not flee from it. Do not project it. Turn and face it. Welcome it home. For in that reunion, in the sacred overlap of your light and your dark, you will find not a monster, but your own long-lost and holy face.